Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the Department of Psychology here at Edge Hill University. It's wonderful to see you all, and particularly to see so many of our students here with us, past and present in fact. Lovely to have you. I'm Philip Murphy. It's my privilege, as I always say, to be the head of the Department of Psychology here. And it's a great pleasure today for me to welcome Professor Jamie Hacker Hughes, the current president of the British Psychological Society, who is going to give us a lecture. Jamie started his working life actually in the British Army before leaving the army to go into computing. And he was actually 30 years old before he decided to go into psychology, but has developed an illustrious career with a very strong research interest and background in post-traumatic stress disorder. He's worked and done some leading work as a clinical psychologist, as well as being a researcher and recently playing a leading role within our professional body, the BPS. So without any more from me, with the sincere reminder that I'm sure you've all switched your mobile phones off, it is my great pleasure to welcome Professor Jamie Hacker Hughes.
Thank you very much indeed. It's really good to be here. And in return for asking if I could come up and visit Edge Hill, I've had to sing for my supper. And so here, I've had the supper. It was very nice. It was low-calorie pasta and chips. It was great. It was really nice. I'm really pleased that I've finally made it to Ormskirk, because when I was at university before the army, I had a girlfriend from Ormskirk, but she obviously didn't think that I was fit to show her mum and dad. So I never came here, and until now. So it's really good to be in Ormskirk. And I had no idea until I just did a bit of research that actually this is where Liverpool Edge Hill was. And I heard the story of someone who came to visit the university who ended up stuck in the Edge Hill area of Liverpool, miles away from here. But anyway, I'm glad I did my research first of all. So I've been asked to speak on the role and relevance of psychology in today's world. I did a little Freudian slip and changed relevance to influence because that's what I'm really keen on. And as I said, I'm Jamie Hacker Hughes. Thank you, Philip, very much for hosting me in the department. I had a good time meeting with all the departmental staff, or a lot of them, this afternoon. Pleased to say that they didn't give me that much of a hard time. I've got a few bits of homework to take away, and I started delivering on some of the goods I promised I'd deliver on immediately, so that was good. I've had a look around the department, which is very good. I've sampled the pasta and chips, and they were excellent. And if you want to get hold of me, I'm a tweetaholic, and I'm on @ProfJamieHH. So please follow me on Twitter, and I'll follow you back and send you tweets and all sorts of stuff. Okay. So, so the title is The Role and Relevance or Influence of Psychology in Today's World. And this is a very unusual photo. You can find lots of these all over the web, and most of them have North America on it. You know, honestly, if you do that, you picture the globe, North America. Had to look very hard. I found one with the UK on it. We're the little people up at the top there. But there we are. And the reason that I dug this out was, of course, psychology isn't just about what happens in the world, but actually at the moment it's very much what happens outside the world. And thinking at this very moment about Major Tim and his spacewalk, and Major Tom, who David Bowie, of course, sang about. There are hundreds of psychologists in NASA, and the amount of psychology that goes into that expedition, from surviving in hostile environments, selection, the right sort of personality and occupational psychology as to how all the astronauts fit together in the team, diet, sleep, lack of exercise. There's a huge team of psychologists involved. So actually, psychology isn't just these days relevant just to the world, it's relevant outside the world, and the space station that's up there at the moment is a living example of that. So now, of course, everyone knows what a psychologist does, and this is the popular image of psychology, isn't it? Except normally it's not the psychologist that's lying on the couch, as in this case. Normally someone else is lying on the couch. And of course everyone knows what a psychologist does, don't they? Or do they? And when I tell people that I'm a psychologist, it's the normal thing. I bet it happens to all of you, doesn't it? Go to a party. What do you do? What are you studying? I'm studying psychology, or I'm a psychologist. And they all say, do you know what I'm thinking? And you say, well, I do, but it's just so dull. It's just so dull. Or tell me, I've always wondered, what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist? You get that one? What is the difference? So actually people don't know, do they? Not nearly as many people know. And in my that's why I came in actually to stand as president of the British Psychological Society, because I have got this thesis that we're not. I did 5 years, as Professor Murphy said, in sales and marketing management, and I just think that generally, as a profession, as a discipline, we're not nearly as good as we could be at selling ourselves and promoting ourselves and letting others know about what we do. So not everyone knows what a psychologist does, I would say. But we have got an ology. Now, this is a very, very, very old clip, and if I can get it to work, I hope I can.
Anthony? Oh, congratulations on your exam results.
Grandma, I failed.
You failed? What do you mean you failed?
I mean I failed. Maths, English, physics, geography, German, woodwork, art. I failed.
You didn't pass anything?
Pottery.
Pottery? Very useful. Anthony, people will always need plates.
And sociology.
An ology? He gets an ology and he says he's failed. You get an ology, you're a scientist.
Whether it's with luck or hard luck, a phone call says a lot.
Really, it was the teachers who were wrong. You know, they can't mark.
British Telephone. It's you we answer to.
Okay, that's a really, well, you can see 1988, really old advert, but yeah, we've got nology. So we have got nology, so that's got to be pretty good, isn't it, really? Okay. Anyway, what is the difference between the psychologist and the psychiatrist? Anyone know what the difference is? £30,000. And we have to buy our own pens and Post-its. True, that's what I always tell people. No, not really. They're medics and we're not. And they're sort of generalist medics who go on to specialise, but we specialise right from the start. That's the difference. So this psychology, what is it all about? Well, if you look in a dictionary, it will tell you psychology is the study of the human mind and behaviour. Sounds a bit dull, doesn't it? But it's not. It's just so, it's not dull at all. Because it's been around for a long time. This is a very interesting fact about psychology. Psychology is all about men with beards. Okay, so if we go back to the very origins of psychology, so we have Wilhelm Wundt in the University of Leipzig, who set up this first psychology laboratory, and then over the Atlantic in America, William James, who was the first real sort of psychologist over in the States. And then, just so we don't leave them out as well, there's Ivan Petrovich Pavlov in St. Petersburg, men with beards. So actually we're not doing very well. Not many men and not many beards. So we're not doing very well. I went to St. Petersburg actually this summer. We have the British Psychological Society signs memoranda of association with different associations around the the world, and we have them with America and Canada. And we now have one with Russia, with the Russian Psychological Society. It's one of the oldest psychological societies in the world. And it's quite funny, actually, because our Board of Trustees agreed that we would sign the Memorandum of Association at the European Conference in Milan. But I was going over to St. Petersburg to give a lecture, and they said, well, can we sign something in St. Petersburg? So I invented something called a Declaration of Intent to enter into a Memorandum of Understanding, which was translated into Russian and signed in great ceremony in the Great Hall in St. Petersburg University. And then we signed the proper thing in Milan. So psychology has been around a long time, and then finally it came over to this country, and it came over here in 1901, and you'll be pleased to see, if you look at this thing, firstly, no beards, which is good. Secondly, a woman. Ta-da! At long last. Not just a woman, but an amazing woman. Also, third fact, only one psychologist. Only McDougall was the only psychologist. The rest of them were interested in psychology, but were lecturers and professors. But Sophie Bryant, who's this woman here, who was a headmistress, she's an amazing woman. She climbed the Matterhorn 3 times, apparently. So she was nothing to be trifled with. Anyway, so the BPS, as it became in 1906, has been around for a while. And initially, it was really just very, very, very confined. It was confined to these 3 areas: science, perception, memory, cognition, all those sorts of things; education, teaching; occupation, work, time and motion, etc. And what happened is that from that time onwards, it just expanded. So psychology now covers everything, right from relationships. So the relationships we have with each other, women and men, women and women, men and men, fathers and children, parents and children, social relationships, and then going on to child development, child psychology, infant psychology, and then going on from that to education, the psychology of education, primary education, secondary education, special needs education, tertiary education. And then, of course, work, as I said, work and education have been around right from the word go, pretty much. But the psychology of work, really big area these days. And of course, there's another side, isn't there, to work, because there are, of course, lots of us who are able to work, which is fantastic, but there are also lots of us who don't work, and the psychology of unemployment and the social psychology of human conditions, and then work-life balance. That's another big area. These days, the feeling is that actually we don't do nearly enough life and we do much too much work. And then, of course, psychology, huge area of psychology and psychological research is all to do with health and healthy behaviour and clinical psychology and mental health, psychological health and treatment and interventions, a huge area of psychology. And then forensic psychology, criminological psychology, the psychology of criminal justice, of offending and rehabilitation, and the relationship between offending and substance misuse, and offending and personality, and then death, and the psychology of death and dying and bereavement. So really, so birth to death, I would say, and everything between, and all our interactions that we have with people and things and all the processes. So it's a huge, huge, huge area. And that's why, one of the reasons why I think that psychology is just such a fantastic thing to study and is just so relevant to life, because you just cannot get away from psychology. Whatever you do, you can't get away from it. So where are we? So it started in 1901, the Psychological Society in the UK. It then became the British Psychological Society in 1906. And when it started in 1901, it had 12 members. And we've grown a bit since then. And so now psychology is one of the UK's most popular undergraduate degree subjects. It's right up there. It's not the most popular, but it's right up in the top 5, and it moves around there. So it's really, really popular. And it's popular because you can do such a lot with a psychology degree. You can stay in academic psychology, you can move into applied psychology, or you can use your psychology to do lots and lots of other things, which I'll mention in a minute. There are over 100 universities offering BPS accredited, British universities offering BPS accredited first degrees in psychology. That's a lot. It's really, really popular. The BPS has expanded just a bit from 12 to nearly 55,000 people. That's a lot. It's a lot of people. So that means, if you think about it, we're getting near to 1 per 1,000 of the population, all probably because only half the psychologists are actually members of the BPS. It could be 1 per 500. So 1 per 500, certainly one per 1,000 people are psychologists. That's pretty good, actually. That really is pretty good. And as I said before, you can go on apart from research and academia and teaching and all the different other sorts of pure and applied psychology. Psychologists go and work in sport, they go and work in PR, they go and work in advertising, they go and work in radio, they go and work in the media, they go and work in teaching. They do all sorts of things. There's a publication that comes out fairly regularly which looks at the destinations of psychology graduates, and psychology graduates, a lot of them obviously, I'm very glad to say, stay in psychology, but a lot go elsewhere. So within the BPS, the BPS, British Psychological Society, it's the learned society, professional association for psychologists in this country. And the way that we're organised is that we're organised into a number of divisions, which are more applied psychology type things, and then a number of sections. So the divisions, first of all, just to give you a feel of the breadth of psychology these days. Academic, research and teaching psychology, so people working in university departments like this. Education and child psychology, and we haven't got just one division of those, we've got 2 because there's a different set of legislation in this country, in Scotland. Clinical psychology, neuropsychology, coaching psychology. We've got a special group in coaching psychology, so these are people who work with people in industry and in commerce and who coach them to become better and better in their jobs. Counselling psychology, forensic and legal psychology. So you can see just how wide it is. Occupational psychology, health, you can't probably read that very well, health psychology and sports and exercise psychology. So these are all our divisions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them, and a special group. The most, probably the biggest in terms of the applied ones are clinical and occupational and educational, which is where we all started. Neuropsychology is one of the newest. Coaching psychology isn't a division yet, it's a special group. But there are these areas of health and psychology, sports and exercise psychology, which are really, really growing. And quite often people belong to more than one of those divisions. So those are all the different areas that psychologists work in. And then in terms of the academics, the way that the BPS works out is that we have sections. So people who are interested in these different things join a section, and divisions and sections have conferences and events and journals and all sorts of things. And you can just sort of see the whole sort of range there, from things like qualitative methods and mathematical and statistical and computing and history and philosophy of psychology, to psychology of women, psychology of sexualities, transpersonal psychology. Right at the bottom you'll see cyber psychology. So cyber psychology, which I know is the interest of at least one person in the room, has been given the go-ahead to become a section, and it's going through the process of having a society-wide vote to get enough numbers for that formally to happen, and then defence and security psychology is just behind it. So the scope of psychology is huge, absolutely huge. So what's the role of psychology as I see it? Well, this is just me, okay? This is Jamie Hacker Hughes. I think that our primary role is to discover, because we are a science. In most places, psychology is a science degree, to discover and inform and influence through our research and publications. I think, that's quite often academic psychologists feel that they're left out of the limelight, they don't get the glory. It's always the applied psychologists. But actually, I think that's our main role, to discover things about the mind, about the brain, about behaviour, inform people about it, and influence people through research. And I learnt today that actually the research quality of this department here is brilliant for a fairly young department. So you're definitely doing the right thing here. To inform and influence through conferences and public engagement. Is anyone here not anything to do with the university at all? No, totally failed on the public engagement. Oh no, good. Excellent. So back conferences, to get out there, not just to stay in our little huddles and academic ivory towers, but to get out there and engage the public. And some people are really, really good at that. Say Richard Wiseman from a university that I've got an association with, Hertfordshire. He's really good about going out and engaging people with psychology. Cooperation, nationally and internationally. That means, so internationally, associations with other psychology associations around the world. And this year we're going to be signing another 4 with Sweden, Iceland, New Zealand, and somewhere else, perhaps just 3. But nationally as well, it's about our psychological society having cooperative relationships with, in my area of clinical, with the British Association of Counselling and the Psychoanalytic Council and the UK Council on Psychotherapy. We've just signed up to an agreement to do all that, and together that means that we can lobby and we can speak as the voice of psychotherapy or whatever it is. And the same applies to academic psychology as well. To influence practice and all these things in education and in health and in work, leisure, they've all got a huge psychological component, as I'll tell you about in a minute. To inform and influence policy and politics. Now, this is an area that we haven't been very good at, actually, and the British Psychological Society has a charter, a royal charter, and it says the objects of the society are to diffuse the knowledge of psychology, pure and applied, and etc., etc., etc. And the argument has always been that means that we can't be political, but it doesn't say that at all. And of course, psychology really should inform politics. So I've taken a big step in that direction in my last 10 months as president. I've put out 20 very political, with a small p, statements about refugees, about migrants, about the work capability assessment, about employment support allowance, about, and I think that psychology has definitely got a role there. To inform and influence and inform through the media. We're getting better at that. We used not to be really, really good, but actually there are a number of psychologists who are regularly on the media. Professor Murphy has been talking to the BBC about potentially doing something later on in the week. So often these things don't happen. They contact you, say, will you come on? And then it all goes very quiet, but we're all used to that. But no, a lot of us are getting out there a lot more than we have in the past. Through the press, through the radio, through the TV, through YouTube. TED Talks are amazing. You all know about TED Talks? Yeah. There's a psychologist, research psychologist from Liverpool University up the road called Eleanor Longden, who is interested in schizophrenia, not just as an academic, but because she's had it and suffered from it herself. I've forgotten the number now, but the number of views that talk has had are absolutely phenomenal. So these ways, actually, that's a really good way of getting the message out through YouTube and through TED Talks, through Twitter, of course. So, and to do all this, this is basically what my presidency has been about. We need to be present. We need to be at conferences. We need to be at roundtables. We need to be at parliamentary committees, standing committees, working groups. We need to be there. We need to be visible. We need people to say, oh, so-and-so's there, and they're a psychologist. It's really important. We need to be out there. We need to be vocal. We need to say things. We've got a lot to say. And generally, we haven't been as good at saying things as we could do. And all this is in order to have impact. Nice, good Edge Hill colours there. Nice Edge Hill purple. It's BPS purple as well. So I thought I'm doing both. Multitask. Who says men can't multitask? No. In order to have impact. So that's what we need to do, to have impact on policy, impact on practice, impact on research, impact on life. So what I'd like to do now is just give you some examples of what some psychologists have been doing in all these different fields. So, research. This is just stuff that's gone on over the last year, okay? Professor Rona Moss-Morris was awarded the BPS Outstanding Contribution to Research Prize. She focuses her research interests on models that help the conceptualisation and treatment of conditions characterised by persistent physical symptoms, including chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, and post-concussion syndrome. So, Vincent Deary, health psychologist, made a significant impact with the publication of his book, How to Live, a treatise on the human condition, Thou Struggle with Change. Publications. The Special Group of Coaching Psychology have produced 2 publications in collaboration with the Australian Psychological. So just some examples. If you go onto the, if you're a member of the BPS, who's a member? Quite a few, okay, good. The rest of you, please join, okay. It's really worthwhile. If you join, you can go to Professor Murphy's office next week and collect a purple BPS badge, which I'm going to leave in there for you, okay. But also, you get access to EBSCO searches, you get access to the Research Digest, which is what I was actually going to talk about then. It's brilliant, it's really, really good. It just very quickly sort of summarises all the research that's going on, interesting research, psychology-wise. You can join some branches and sections and networks and stuff. So, what have we got next? Okay, so public engagement. The Division of Occupational Psychology are running a stream at the Health and Wellbeing Conference on occupational psychology and organisational behaviour, attracting over 3,000 delegates on a yearly basis, supported by over 30 industry associations, Division of Forensic Psychology, delivery of free lectures and seminars for psychologists and non-psychologists across the country. Cooperation, national and international. Dr. Lucy Byrne-Davis from the University of Manchester has been awarded a grant from the Tropical Health and Education Trust in association with DFID, the Department for International Development, and for the Global Health Exchange to send behavioural scientists overseas in the Change Exchange project. So this is really brilliant. So what they're doing is they're getting funds to send health psychologists to developing countries and have a real impact on that country. And on midwifery practices, and it's really good actually. The special group on coaching psychology. There's an international coaching psychology research network, collaborative research projects in coaching psychology. Education. The Education and Child Psychology Division have responded. This is a big issue actually. There's a big Department for Education and Health Education England consultation on reviewing the training of psychologists working with children. Currently, what happens is that you do your first degree in psychology, and then if you want to be an educational psychologist, you go off and do your master's or doctorate in educational psychology. And if you want to be a clinical psychologist, you go off and do your clinical doctorate. But what the Department for Education wanted was actually to split it a different way and to have child psychologists and adult psychologists, which all of us felt actually was totally the wrong thing to do. So we told them, really. Whether they'll listen or not, I don't know. The development of guidance for the delivery of psychological therapies in schools, ensuring effective early intervention support is available and accessible to children and young people. Health. Department of Neuropsychology initiated support work with the Neurological Alliance, supporting patients affected by neurological conditions, etc., etc. Department of Clinical Psychology, this is happening at the moment. There's a Health Education England project on formulation and the development. Formulation is something we do as psychologists. So instead of taking a medical history, we look at all the various factors affecting someone's life and how they've got to where they are at the moment. And the idea is that actually there are lots of other professions that could do with that sort of psychological knowledge. So that's what's going on there. Work. Wouldn't you like to work like that? What this is about, this slide actually, is saying that some people just can't switch off when they go on holiday. And I think that's very, very true. So the Department of Occupational Psychology have developed and published a standard, the design and development of assessment centres, development and publication of the report Engage and Change. These are just examples, really. Sport and exercise. Numerous members of the Division of Sport and Exercise continue to provide psychological support to great British athletes in the build-up to the 2016 Olympics and Paralympics. As president, I get to travel around a lot. I come to exciting places like Edge Hill. And earlier on, last year, I went over to Northern Ireland. It's a place called Armagh. And there I met this amazing woman called Kelly Gallagher. And Kelly Gallagher is really visually impaired, blind, and she has got the gold medal for the women's Paralympic Super G downhill skiing. She skis down, stuff like that, with a guide. And she had a psychologist working alongside her. And so many sports now. So teams have got psychologists, football teams have got psychologists, high performance athletes have got psychologists. Sports and exercise psychology is huge. I went to the Sports and Exercise Psychology Conference in Leeds just before Christmas. I've never seen so many sort of toned, well-built psychologists in my life. Most of us aren't like that, but they were there anyway. So, and then policy and politics. So I mentioned about all the various press releases on work capability assessment and on refugees and on migrants. There's a newly formed Personality Disorders Commission that we've got input into. There's loads of psychologists working on stuff like radicalisation, which is really topical at the moment. Parliamentary engagement on brain injury and crime. And then social justice. I'm at the back somewhere. This was a whole bunch of us who did a thing called Walk the Talk in the summer. And we walked from the British Psychological Society office in Leicester to the British Psychological Society office in London, which was 100 miles in 5 days. I cheated, actually. I went home after 3 days because I'd hurt myself. But I came back on the last day. And that was okay. And it was all about, so we slept out every night. We slept rough every night. And we called into food banks and homeless shelters, and we gave interviews to the press. And it was all about actually saying that various political decisions, unemployment, homelessness, poverty, food poverty, have a knock-on effect on people's psychological health. So it was all about raising that awareness. There's an organisation called Psychologists Against Austerity. You probably heard about the Equality for Mental Health, the Ruby Wax, Alistair Campbell, Norman Lamb thing, which we very much support. Refugees and migrants. I've initiated a presidential task force on refugees and migrants. And then the media. Do you recognise that person? She's your beloved Chancellor, who actually does probably more for promoting psychology in the media than anyone else, I'd say, through House of Tiny Terrorways, through her regular columns in the Times. She's going to be co-presenting with Robert Winston, A Child of Our Time. Yeah, she's out there. She's not the only one, though. Oliver James, psychologist, Claudia Hammond, and then if you listen to there's a thing called Radio 4, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, in the mornings. But on that, the reason I stood for president was I used to throw things at my radio when there were people who weren't psychologists talking about psychological things. But actually recently there are lots more. So John Drury was talking, a guy from Sussex, talking about crowd research. Anne Cook was talking about psychosis. Barbara Sahakian was talking about neuropsychology. Jamie Hacker Hughes, so I was on the Today programme, which is nice, which is good. So, psychology is really, really, really broad, and this is just a recap of our divisions. And we're involved in all of these areas and more besides. We are extremely relevant. So answering the exam question, what is the role and relevance of psychology? We're relevant. We're relevant to all these things. And what is our role? Our role is to influence and discover and all those things that I said. I'd just like to take you through. Because I'm a BPS member, I can go onto the BPS website. You see, anyone can really. And I just looked at the news releases that the BPS has put out over the last year, just to show you the sorts of things that have been going on. So, January 2015, some research, University of Bedfordshire, looking at prison officers' mental health. Prison officers, considerable source of work-related stress, violence, intimidation, threats from prisoners. This is so true. Workers' well-being suffers by staying switched on. And there's another big paper which got a big splash from the Occupational Psychology Conference not long ago, that if we stay switched on outside office hours, we may be more efficient at work, but in the long run, we become stressed and our work-life balance goes out of the window. So I practice what I preach. And on my email, it says, I only handle emails during office hours between Monday and Friday. That's it, full stop. I turn it off. And I literally do. So I just go onto my iPhone, BPS, off, university, off, home, off. Turn it all off. It's great. It's fantastic. And then in the summer, when I go on holiday, I put everything to auto-delete. I say, if your email is urgent, contact X. And if not, and you really want me to read your email, send it again after such and such a date, and I just put everything to auto-delete. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. So dyslexia, so research on dyslexia, and basically, if you just go to the bottom, the teachers who've been asked about reading difficulties were less likely to see the children's problems as permanent, but if they'd been asked about dyslexia, then they did. So February, we signed a memorandum of understanding on conversion therapy. This is all about putting people through therapy to change their sexuality, which is just absolutely iniquitous Anyway, so we're totally signed up to that. That's Eleanor Longden, who I talked about earlier on. Recognised by Nick Clegg, the then Deputy Prime Minister. Time to talk is a big thing about mental health stigma. It's really important that people talk about mental health and challenge stigma. And again, I'm going to practice what I preach. I've had a diagnosis of bipolar disorder for 15 years. It doesn't stop me from doing what I'm doing at the moment. And it's really important that we all do that. March, evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee on prisons, saying that if you put prisoners in prison and you don't have purposeful activity, then obviously it makes things worse. But this was a report where we were having impact, so we were being quoted in a House of Commons committee. Psychological stress by sport performers and on autism and social cognition. There's another reason to join the BPS. There are awards, grants, scholarships, bursaries, money, okay? So, youth mental health services, playing their part to delivering the proposals outlined in Future in Mind, which is all about youth mental health services. We've got big problems about youth mental health services. There aren't enough of them. So we're lobbying for more and more and more. And I've been very lucky to be on this thing called the Mental Health Task Force, which is a year-long sort of government task force looking at improving this stuff. We're due to be reporting any minute, really. This is interesting stuff for students, this. So if you have a glass, and I know there are a number of people in the audience who might be interested in this, and if you put markings on the glass, then people drink much more slowly. And there's a difference, I can't remember which way it goes, between curved glasses and straight glasses. One of them you drink more slowly and one of them you drink more quickly. Gaming. Ooh, look who this is. Okay, so there we are. Social side of online gaming. It's really relevant at the moment. There are so many people. Talk to my son about it. There are so many people who spend a lot of time doing online gaming. Violent news. This is interesting. So University of Bradford, looking at social violent news events on social media. And yeah, it affects people. Of course it does. June, birthday honours. Vicky Bruce was made a dame for her work on perception. Colleague of mine, Suzanne McGowan, got an OBE, who I work with in the OBE, in the MOD, and Janet Carr and Emma Kravitz were awarded, which is really good. This was the thing I mentioned earlier, work capability assessment. We said this in June. We've been asking for meetings with the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions since June, and we have got nowhere fast, but we're going to carry on asking. There's hopefully going to be a Channel 4 dispatches programme on it next month. And I'm sure when that comes out that suddenly we're going to get an invitation. I've just got a little feeling. Hoarding, guidelines on hoarding, big problem, really big problem. You ought to see my brother's house. July, family bonds, strong relationships with other people can help raise self-esteem. This was the Psychology of Women conference. As I said, I've just been through and just picked things through. We put out a very strong statement about this. This was the Hoffman Review. The Hoffman Review looked at the American Psychological Association. It basically found that some of their psychologists were much too mixed up with torture and interrogation and Guantanamo Bay and things than they should have been. So we put out a very strong statement on that. August, close friendships help young people to overcome adversity. We put out a statement on sickness benefits in August. Pressure to be available on social media. So if you're available 24/7 on social media, it can affect your sleep and can affect anxiety. So you see the whole sort of, the whole range of applications of psychology. We welcomed the call for psychological support to refugees. We've now initiated a presidential task force on it. New handbook on children and adolescent mental health in October. number of psychologists on Radio 4 on a debate and All in the Mind. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you can listen to it on the radio, or you can listen to it on iPlayer, on iPods or whatever. It's a really good weekly serial program about sort of psychology, mental health. November, this was really good. We launched our dementia guidelines in Northern Ireland, and we had a third of the number of Northern Ireland Assembly members in the audience, which was really good. More Active Britain, compelling case for physical activity. December, new tool developed by Bournemouth University identifying mothers at risk of postnatal depression. Educational psychology, new monograph. And again, this New Year's Honours we did amazingly well. Got 3 people made dames. Leslie Fallowfield for cancer research, Margaret Whitehead for public health, and Till Wykes for clinical psychology, and Nicola Rumsey got an OB. I mean, amazing really. And psychology is up there now. We're getting recognised for it. It wasn't the case before. We just missed out on everything. And here we go again, guys. How you manage emails may be bad for your health. And this went out just a couple of weeks ago, really. And what he basically said was the sort of thing I was saying earlier, just turn it off, take breaks from it. So, the role and relevance of psychology today. So I've talked about the relevance. This is what I think our role is. To inform and influence, to discover, to inform and influence. Through research, through publications, through conferences, through public engagement. To influence through cooperation. So we've just signed this memorandum of understanding with the Russians. Now the Russians were one of the first psychological societies, and then with one thing or another they've sort of completely gone off on another path. And I see it partially as our role to help sort of bring them in from the cold a bit, actually, and bring them back into the mainstream. To influence practice in education, health, work and leisure, policy and politics I've talked about, and the media. It's really important that in the same way that your Chancellor, Professor Tanya, does, we get out there and we speak and we influence and we let people know about psychology and psychologists. So we've got to be there in the first instance. People have got to see us there in the second instance. They've got to hear, we've got to say things, and people have got to hear us, and we have got to have impact. Now, whether or not that's impact as measured through citation indexes and ref scores, or whether that's impact on policy or impact on practice, or just impact on people's thinking. So that's it. Thank you very much.
I'll be putting forward a formal vote of thanks to Jamie in just a few minutes, but Jamie has agreed to take a few questions before we go upstairs for some food and wine. So Jamie, I'll hand it back to you to share the questions.
Absolutely. Good. So, so I made sure I finished at 10:02 so we could have 10 minutes for questions. Just before we start, you've got my Twitter handle. If you want to just keep an eye on what I'm up to week by week, I'm sure you'll be fascinated. That's the address. So I do a presidential blog. I'll be blogging about you, so you can look next week or later on this week, and then you needn't bother. Right, any questions? I'd be more than happy about anything to do, well, psychology related, preferably. Go on. Yes, well done. Final year, Edge Hill, psychology student, leading the way.
You were saying before about how government policies and things and laws that come through can have kind of detrimental effects on people's psychological well-being. Do you think, or what do you think the case would be with the recent cuts to student grants, maintenance grants, in terms of prospective students coming into universities? Do you think it might deter people from applying and perhaps pursuing a degree?
Yes, I do, without a doubt. And there's a very similar current issue about nurse training, because up until now, nurses have been trained through bursaries, and they've been funded, and the proposal is that that's taken away, and of course we're worried because clinical psychologists are funded the same way. The same thing's going to happen to us as well, and yes, so it was very easy. Of course, it's going to have an impact, and as far we're sort of fighting our own corner a bit about. Well, we're not fighting yet about clinical psychology, but certainly as far as students are concerned, then it's something that we're all concerned about. Yes. Pardon. Right, who's next? Go on. Yes, hello.
I'm not actually a psychologist,
Right.
I'm a dance movement psychotherapist,
Yeah,
but
hi.
I work in a team which is mainly psychologists, because I work in health services, I work in mental health services, and we've kind of been redesigned so that we're all together, so the art psychotherapy and the psychologists are together. And they're all banded at band 8 and we're banded at band 7, so we kind of feel like they're juniors. But I was I was just interested to know how you see us, I guess, really, because what I found is that the psychologists in our team are quite fascinated, certainly by dance movement and the other art psychotherapy. So they are quite keen to hear from us. You know, if we're talking about formulations that we don't learn about, particularly about formulations. So that's something I've learned from psychologists. But also when they're struggling with somebody maybe who's got a lot of somatic symptoms, then they might come and say, oh, Jackie, can I talk to you? I've got this person and there's something in their body and I'm not quite sure. So they'll often come and ask me questions. So we're working together, basically. But I just wondered how, you know, as a society, how you see us.
Right. Well, I just tell you my own personal view. I haven't worked with dance psychotherapists, but I've worked with music therapists alongside music therapists and art psychotherapists. And we've worked very much as a multi-professional team. So the whole aim is that, that we're working with the person, whoever that is. When I was working with music therapists, I was working with people with intellectual disabilities, and the music therapists could do wonders, whereas other members of the team couldn't. When I was working with arts therapists, psychotherapists, it was when I was working with military veterans with post-traumatic stress. And again, they could, make contact and have inroads in ways that, psychological. So the way I see it, it is all about working together. I didn't know anything about the distinction between band 7 and band 8, though. That's terrible. That's good. Thank you.
I teach psychology in a college, mostly A-level students, and as I've been teaching over the years, I see more sort of divisions occurring in types of psychology or approaches to psychology, and I wondered how you saw whether psychology you thought was going to become more cohesive or if there'd be a split. So I often have students say to me, that's just like biology, isn't it? Or on the other side will say, well, that's just like sociology, isn't it? And I do see this, quite diverse opinion on things. How do you see it as a coherent subject?
Really good question. I used to have a thing in The Psychologist called the President's Column, and we've redesigned the Psychologist, so there aren't society pages now. There are if there's to be any society news, it's got to be newsworthy, and if it's newsworthy, it gets published. So there's a President's Letter, and that's exactly what I wrote my President's Letter about. That I showed you all those different divisions. The danger is that people get siloed, and the clinical psychologists are different from the counselling, who are different from the educational and the forensic. And what I always say to people is, I'm Jamie and I'm a psychologist. Some people say, I'm Jamie and I'm an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic, but I'm a psychologist. And I'm that, first and foremost, because as far as the outside world goes, they haven't a clue what the difference is between a neuropsychologist and whatever. So I think there is a danger of fragmentation, and I think something that we've really got to resist, I would say. So being a psychologist is what should matter first and foremost. I think it's for the recording, the microphone, rather than...
I'm particularly interested in the cultural influence to psychology and how psychology is accepted in certain societies due to culture, and how that might differ also in psychology as an educational discipline, how culture impacts on that. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Well, all I know is that just from working with international colleagues and colleagues across the world, some cultures are much more sort of psychologically minded than others, and I think we're probably about halfway in the UK. You know, we're more psychologically minded than we used to be, and psychology is more accepted than it used to be, but we've got a long way to go. And just an example of that was that a long time ago, when people used to get referred to me as a clinical psychologist, people would come along to me and say, well, my doctor thinks it's all in the mind, you know, and so they didn't actually see that, you know, psychological therapy was a way forward. But actually, if people are referred now to a psychologist for psychotherapy, it's much more accepted. So yeah, there are large cultural differences. I think there was a nation where more psychologically minded than we were, but we've got a bit of a way to go. Right. Anyone else? Yes. You've got 1 minute. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
You mentioned earlier that people generally have quite a poor understanding of what psychology is. And because of that, do you think people generally have a poor understanding of themselves? And because, as you mentioned, the psychology is such a broad subject and affects relationships and health and education, do you think that it should be taught in primary and secondary schools, and you think that there should be a push for people to have that understanding at an earlier age?
Quick answer. Yes, I do. I've signed the Twitter petition, and there's an online petition, and you'll be able to find it, about psychology education in schools. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you know, there's PSHE, isn't there, which people get taught. But there isn't psychological education, there isn't mental health education. I'm working with a charity called the Mental Health Foundation at the moment, and we've come up with this idea of RAG rating, you know, red, amber, green, and just having a little checklist that school pupils can learn about, just to look for warning signs when perhaps they ought to go and talk to people about their problems. So that's one little thing. But yeah, there's an online petition about psychology education in schools. I signed it, and you could too.
Okay. Right. In case I should forget, I will just say in a moment, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity to meet and talk with Jamie over a buffet and some wine upstairs on the first floor. So that's an important announcement to make. And I'm sure particularly you'd like to meet more of our students before we head back on the train down to London. So do take advantage of this opportunity. It now falls to me to say thank you. Jamie, you've been a brilliant guest. You've given us a very informative talk this evening. Really answered the question. I know also earlier this afternoon with my colleagues, we much appreciated the time we had with you. You gave us time also for a video interview, which I believe will be available through the website. So you've given us a lot of input today. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
And please join me in thanking you.
Thank you very much.